This is Horror Podcast.
Welcome to This is Horror, a podcast for readers, writers, and creators. I'm Michael David Wilson, and every episode alongside my co-host Bob Pastorella, we chat with masters of horror about writing, life lessons, creativity, and much more. Now today's guest is Paul Tremblay, and Paul is a long-time friend of the podcast, so it was great to get him back on the show. We especially spoke about his new release, the Pallbearers Club, and the forthcoming M. Night Shyamalan adaptation of The Cabin at the End of the World, Knock at the Cabin. Now, Paul is definitely one of those must-read authors within horror, right up there with the likes of Stephen Graham Jones and Josh Malerman, to name but two more. And it was his breakout novel, A Head Full of Ghosts, that really got him on the horror scene. But of course, for long-time fans of Paul Tremblay, you'll know that there are a number of crime novels that he wrote before that. So, I mean, I do implore you to check out a load of his back catalogue, see what you can track down, because it's always a treat reading Paul Tremblay. It's always a treat chatting to him as well. So I really think you're going to have a lot of fun with this one. But before any of it, a little bit of an advert break.
Hey horror fiends, it's Tim Levin here from the UK. I'm delighted to be an author guest at Horror on Main. Really hope you can join us there. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be scary. There's going to be lots of books for sale. Oh, it's going to be glorious. So I really hope to see you there. I'm looking forward to it so much. Be scary, keep reading, be safe.
Horror on Main, a new weekend convention for the horror community. We've been going to conventions for over 20 years and are changing up the little things to make the big picture amazing. Join us Memorial Day weekend 2023 in Hunt Valley, Maryland. Come to the block party and meet your new neighbors. See horroronmain.com for details.
Tried and True or Done to Death. It Was All a Dream, an anthology of bad horror tropes done right, revives even the most exhausted cliches with stories from some of horror's biggest names like Gemma Files, Gabinio Iglesias, and Haley Piper. It Was All a Dream, an anthology of bad horror tropes done right, available anywhere you buy books online. Use this code ThisIsHorror for 20% off through the month of October when you order direct from HungryShadowPress.com.
Okay, with that said, here it is. It is Paul Tremblay on This is Horror. Paul, welcome back to This is Horror podcast.
Thank you. I missed it. Or I should say, I missed being on. It's been a while.
Yeah, we have missed
Which is
you.
sort of obnoxious to say, sorry. Yeah, like that I've had the opportunity and luxury to be on multiple times, but it's the truth.
Well, not only have you been on multiple times, but I was looking at the stats before recording this episode. And so prior to this, you had been on the podcast in 10 episodes. So with this one, you're going to have been on 12 times because it will be a two-parter. I'm confident
okay,
to say.
Two-parters, okay.
Yeah, that's what we've done. We've done two-parters and three-parters. So you've been on 10 episodes. So I think last time there was disagreement. Was it you? Was it Stephen Graham Jones who had been on the most? But we can definitely say now that you are the most featured guest on This Is Horror podcast. So take that,
thanks,
Stephen.
Well, I appreciate that. But I imagine, I hope that you'll have Stephen on again soon. Because I'm sure like by the time we finish recording this episode, he'll have probably written another 2 or 3 books within that time.
It is very likely that that will have happened. And, you know, unless you kind of hack in and kind of stop and deflect the Stephen emails because you don't want him to take over, then yeah, we'll definitely be getting him back on. But I mean, your first appearance on This Is Horror was episode 47 in 2015. So we've been doing this dance for 7 years now.
Yeah, amazing. No, amazing that you guys have been doing it this long as well. And congratulations. I mean, it just seems to be getting, continuing to grow, and the podcast itself stronger and stronger. So kudos to you guys.
Yeah, thank you. Well, as this is not just a pat each other on the back episode, unfortunately,
here's where we start fighting. No.
Yeah, we're just gonna have a fight now. But I heard you say that you'd taken a year off from teaching, so I just wanted to clarify, is that this forthcoming year or is that the previous year?
It's this forthcoming year that, so yes, so in a few weeks, instead of going back to school, I am not going back to school, which is a weird and kind of nice feeling. Less nice trying to deal with what we're going to have for health insurance. Sort of a very boring story I won't go into, but no, I'm very excited to see what comes from the year from no teaching. I don't know. I guess I'll see my age. I'm 50. I just turned 51. Turned like a werewolf. And this is going to be the first September since I was 3 years old that I will not be going back to a school.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Because I've never had any break. I went right from high school to college, and then 2 years of grad school, and then after grad school I started teaching.
Yeah, and so I mean, and as you've just said, I mean, so for as long as you've been writing, and of course prior to that you have been teaching, you have been going to school, and you've been putting out these incredibly successful novels. So what was it? What was the impetus that made you say, you know what, I'm going to take a year where I'm actually not teaching? Because you've shown that you can clearly produce amazing high quality work and teach, but now you're going kind of full into the writing.
Yeah, well, I mean, so it's positioned as, I have a 1 year sabbatical, so they're going to hold my job for me for 1 year. And then I have to let them know if I'm coming back or not. But part of it was frankly just, the opportunity arose with the film adaptation of The Cabin at the End of the World. They bought the film rights, so, I felt financially comfortable enough to be able to say, you know what, I can take a year off. I have a novel due to my publisher in May. And I will say, as I'm getting older, I'm finding I don't quite have the same energy that I used to, and it feels like both jobs are taking up more time. Both the teaching and the writing. Maybe some of that is like most of us, I spend way too much time on social media, which I probably need to prune back as well. But I have noticed like the last few years, like, man, it's getting harder and harder to balance both. So I mean, I really like teaching a lot. Obviously I really like writing. I don't know. I figured, well, I didn't want to just plunge into writing full time necessarily blindly. Like, let's see what it looks like. Who knows? Maybe like come November, I've spent too much time in my own brain, and I'll be as squirrely as the squirrels that are rampaging the exterior of my house. Yeah. So we'll see how it goes.
That does sound pretty squirrely to me.
I couldn't come up with a better metaphor than comparing squirrels to squirrels.
Yeah. No, we should say for anyone who hasn't read Paul's work, this is not reflective of his writing. Yes. So please don't be discouraged.
A lot of squirrels. The next novel, all squirrels.
Yeah. But, I mean, what are you most excited about with this year away from teaching?
Oh, I mean, I'm most excited about the fall. Like, I've always loved the fall weather-wise. But like, as much as I love teaching, this is going to sound like a lame complaint, but it's kind of hard to go back after having months off. And I know no one's shedding any tears for me that only have like particularly if you're in the United States, if you only have like 2-3 weeks of vacation a year. Yeah, so like for me, the fall has always been like, back to school, and after like a week or two, I'm back in the swing of things. But those first 2 weeks, I'm kind of like professionally depressed and like, I can't believe the summer's over already. So on one level, I'm actually really excited to have a fall where I don't have sort of that feeling. I'm excited and nervous to see what I get accomplished. Like part of what I was hoping to do, and I don't know if the opportunity is going to be there, but I was kind of hoping to maybe try working on some screenwriting stuff, at the same time. And, I know that, as you've mentioned, I've been able to teach and write novels and short stories, but I don't know if I can teach, write screenplays and write novels and short stories at the same time. That seemed like a bit much. And if I do dabble in screenplay writing, I don't want it to take away from novels. Those come first in my mind. I'm a novelist first, or a writer, fiction writer first and foremost. And I also wouldn't presume to think that I'd be very good at screenwriting. It's a totally different skill set. I'm not going to be great at it right off the bat, or ever. Who knows? So, that's partly what I was thinking about, in sort of planning for this year off.
Yeah, and knowing that you now have like the full day for your writing and creative endeavors and whatever it is you choose to do with that time, will you be putting a lot of structure and planning into the day so you've got, almost like a timetable? Could simulate school in a way, but you probably don't need the bell to go, period 1 is over, Paul, now it's doing a short story, period 3 is going to be a screenplay. But are you putting a lot of structure in?
It's funny, I just said to my wife the other day that I was going to try to mimic my school schedule as much as I could, but just have it be for the writing parts of it.
Yeah.
Ultimately at school I would have 3 hours worth of classes, with breaks in between. Obviously there's prep time. At my school, they typically make us coach a couple of sports too. To me, that's always been the biggest time hurdle is the extra coaching time too. So, I guess the short answer is I am, because this summer I have not been as successful as doling out my writing time. I've been kind of treating the summer like a normal summer, but come to September, if this is my job, I'm going to make sure I sort of schedule it that way as well. Yeah, we'll see if that works. I don't know. Maybe I'll have to go back to letting it be free and loose a little bit in terms of not necessarily having a rigid structure, and just have a few hours here and there when I can. So that's part of it is let's just see if I can figure out what it would look like, writing for a job. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned too the screenwriting and of course the adaptation of Cabin, so it's going to be titled Knock at the Cabin. Of course, M. Night Shyamalan, which is incredible, one of the finest filmmakers, I would say, in the world right now. And of course, you've effectively been sitting on this and unable to talk about it since I think it was around 2017. So how does it feel to finally be able to say some things about it?
Yeah, no, it's nice. It was, the book was first optioned 2017, but Knight didn't really come onto the scene until he was a maybe in 2020, but it was really in the late summer, early fall of 21, where it was oh, this might actually happen with him. So it's been maybe a year where I've been sitting on some really exciting news. And frankly, it was kind of stressful in the spring, just because we were going back and forth about, when can we talk, if people ask and stuff like that. And people are starting to put 2 and 2 together based on information that Knight was, leaking out there as what he usually does is, teasing his projects. And so for a big chunk of the spring, I'd get tagged in a Facebook post or a tweet, and I'd, message a person hey, I appreciate the enthusiasm, but can you take that down? We can't talk about it yet. So it was kind of a weird thing to be, sort of policing exciting news, but that yeah, no, it's good to be able to answer questions now when I'm asked about it.
Yeah, yeah. And in terms of your involvement in the project, I mean, how closely involved were you in terms of the film?
Pretty much not at all. Certainly not in any official capacity. I guess my involvement with Knight started with a phone call. I think it was like November of last year, or maybe it was October. Where I talked to him, and just like an introductory thing, and it was he was very pleasant, very very easy to talk to. He was very complimentary about the novel, which was nice. And I was appreciative of how upfront he was about what changes he was going to make. But yeah, other than that, like, he would ask me, like, I would get like random messages from time to time that were kind of fun. Like, hey, M. Night's actually texting my phone. Like, hey, he was like, hey, where did you get the design of the weapons from? Like, what inspired you, for that? And then he would ask me, sometimes I would get questions about some character motivation and stuff like that. And even little things like he wanted to, for some scenes, characters might have needed like a last name kind of stuff. So that was kind of fun just to be like, okay, let's name this person. I never gave any of the other characters like a last name. But yeah, but in terms of like screenplay or anything like that, no, I had no role.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if he ever asked you some questions and you were like, oh, well, that's not something I've kind of conceived of yet, but it seems like you've already answered that like literally It's like, well, did they have a last name? And it's like, well, guess they will in a few minutes for Night.
Yeah.
But I think, I mean, it's got a fantastic cast. But by the way, have you seen the film yet? I don't know, like, kind of what. No.
Yeah, and I don't know, like, if I would get to see an early version. I did get to visit the set for 2 days in May, which was amazing. They finished filming in early June. So I did get to meet the cast, and they were very, very nice, very gracious with their time. They had all read the book and were, again, highly complimented, which was really, really cool of them. Dave Bautista is a large human being.
Yes.
Which is an understatement. I've been joking that he's my height. That part's not the joke, but like, he's got like 60 pounds more muscle.
Yeah.
Me plus 60 pounds more muscle. But to be more accurate, it would be he's 260 pounds of muscle compared to the 200 of whatever my body is. It's not it's not the muscle that Dave Bautista has.
Yeah. I mean, is it true that the only reason you haven't done a kind of radical transformation, because if that happened, it would then be difficult to logistically compare you and Bautista? It's like, well, who's who here? Which
exactly.
one? So, and you're actually doing Dave Bautista a favor by not bulking up.
Yeah, I don't think he has to worry about that happening anytime soon.
But I mean, in all seriousness about Bautista, I mean, I'm a big professional wrestling fan, and for me, it's been really exciting to see him absolutely dominate pro wrestling, then casually just win an MMA fight. He's won one MMA fight, and it's like, right, well, I guess I've conquered that, and then he's gone on to become a legitimate movie star. And I mean, for me, if you look at the quality of his acting, particularly in Blade Runner, I'd say there's a strong argument that he's the greatest pro wrestler turned actor, and I'd put him above the likes of The Rock and John Cena.
Yeah, no, I might playfully argue for Roddy Piper, but
I knew one of you would bring Piper into this.
No, but that's more just me being a fan of Piper.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, he has to carry a lot in this movie. From what I've seen, he's knocking it out of the park. I got to watch 2 days worth of scene shooting, and I got to see some dailies from what they had shot previously. And I think it's just going to be a super intense, beautifully shot, and beautifully acted movie. I feel like I can make those guarantees.
Yeah, and I'm excited to see Rupert Grint in it as well, because of course so many people will just mention Harry Potter and things, but he's
Right.
so much more than that. And I think it was Servant again with Shyamalan that he put in a fantastic kind of dark performance in that. He was very good in this kind of dark comedy called Sick Note as well. So he is a great one to have on board for the project.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. No, I think, yeah, if you've only seen him in the Harry Potter movies, like his role and character will be much different in this movie.
Yeah. 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 But I mean, was this happening with The Cabin? Was that the impetus for you looking into the screenwriting stuff and you wanting to explore that avenue, obviously getting more immersed and visiting the set, or is this an aspiration that was long preceding that?
Yeah. Maybe a little bit of both. I don't know about how much long preceding, but also just, with my, brief experience with adaptations. Geez, maybe it's not that brief anymore, but still very much anecdotal where, A Head Full of Ghosts has been under option since 2015. And that movie has come close to being filmed a number of times and then things falling apart for one reason or the other. But, they're still working at it. And then the Cabin process, I feel like at the end, it sort of felt like it happened quick, when Night came on officially, like in 2021. But again, they had optioned it in 2017 and there were other directors attached initially. So like each of, those two experiences has been a process. And I can't say by who, but Survivor Song has been optioned as well, which is exciting. So part of it is if I were fortunate enough to get another work of mine, whether it's a short story or a novel, I would like to try being in on the adaptation in some level. Whether it's writing or co-writing a screenplay, or if something was, I'm talking in total ifs here. There was nothing like I am not in a writer's room for like a TV show or anything like that. But I figured, that was something I kind of wanted to try to do. I figured if I ever were to leave teaching, I would want, a second writing job, for lack of a phrase, to sort of take that spot, like just so I felt comfortable about the whims of the publishing marketing place, So if I could, get some screenwriting stuff going, then maybe I could, leave teaching. So I figured, with that sort of just rolling around my head for the last few years, with the Cabin movie coming, I figured, within this next year, I bet, maybe there'll be another opportunity because the movie's being made, maybe other works might get looked at, or I might have an opportunity. One of the things I have been actively doing is I've been working with a couple of young filmmakers on trying to take my short story, The Getaway, and make it into a feature-length film. And we've written like a 20-minute pitch / treatment that we've been sort of, meeting different producers in Hollywood with, which has been a wonderful learning experience. I've learned a lot from the two filmmakers. I'm very appreciative that, they're letting me tag along in working on this thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in terms of the screenwriting that you'll be doing, I guess from September, is that an adaptation of some of your work, like The Getaway that you've spoken about, or is this an original? What are you looking at doing?
So, I mean, my plan originally, like this was back in the spring, was my plan. I was kind of hoping, like, The Getaway might hit somewhere. It still might. We're just not sure. It does seem that, like a lot of places, given financially what's happening in Hollywood, a lot. Obviously, I'm sure you've heard about, HBO Max cut. A lot of the streamers are now cutting sort of budgets, and I also can understand like studios are having a harder time like financing movies or getting the money kind of thing. Especially if it's something that hasn't had a screenplay written yet. So I have, when September starts, I'm not going to be writing a screenplay. I'm going to be working on my novel. Maybe hopefully later in the fall, we play something, whether it's The Getaway or, my reps are actively pitching the Pallbearers Club, as well. So, fingers crossed one of those things happens, and if not, that's fine too. I'll have more time to write my novel.
Yeah. Yeah. And in terms of tutelage and in terms of really honing the craft as a screenwriter, who are you kind of looking to, or are you getting advice from people, or is it perhaps these young filmmakers we were talking about, or can you send Knight a text? That's more a joke, but yeah.
So before this year, and actually it was right before the pandemic hit, for practice, as much as anything, I took it seriously. If this comes out well, I wouldn't mind trying to push it. I took my short story, 19 Snapshots of Dennisport, and wrote a feature screenplay. It's probably less than a feature length. It's probably like 70 minutes or something. I love that short story, and there's been some interest in it. Maybe it wasn't the best short story for me to start with because its format or its narrative structure is so unique. I kind of found myself doing the same thing with the screenplay, and I know most studios want their 3 acts and want their beats in a certain place, which I'm sort of frankly less interested in as a storyteller. But with that screenplay, I've sent it to friends who have experience with screenwriting. So actually, the one I probably talked to the most is Sarah Langan. She's sent me some screenplays she's worked on in the past, and I've sent her mine for critiques and vice versa. I've also gotten advice and sort of mentorship from Alejandro Brugués, Cuban writer and filmmaker. Maybe his first movie that made a really big splash was called Juan of the Dead, which if you haven't seen, I highly recommend. But he's also done some work recently. I guess most recently was Nightmare Cinema. He had a segment that a movie that Mick Garris had put together, and Alejandro just announced that he's working on an adaptation of Gabino Iglesias' new novel, which is really exciting.
Perfect.
Yeah, so Alejandro's a good friend, and another screenwriter named Matthew Leslie. I sent him the screenplay I wrote and got some feedback from him. So no, everyone's been super. Whenever I ask, people have been unfailingly, nice and offering their, criticism and help, etc.
That's perfect. And I didn't know about the adaptation of Gabino's work, but that's gonna be super exciting too.
Absolutely.
Well, I'll tell you something. When I was looking into what's going on with Knock at the Cabin, there was one thing that really excited me. I should rephrase that. There were many things that really excited me, but one thing in particular said that Knight has shot the film with a 1990s lens to give it an old school thriller look. And I thought, oh shit, that sounds amazing. Yeah. So I'm really, really intrigued and excited about how that is going to come out.
Yeah, his director of photography, it's so awful I'm going to forget his name, but his director of photography was the director of photography for Robert Eggers' 3 movies, The Witch, The Lighthouse, and The Northman.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a beautifully, as I mentioned, I think it's just going to be a stunningly, visually, it's going to be a beautiful movie. I could see him working on the set, and they were spending a lot of, I think, more time than usual than Knight was used to, setting up in between shots. Just so every shot is actually sort of lit perfectly, and curated, and it looks like how we storyboarded it, etc. So yeah, that was even though I wasn't there very long, it's really cool to sort of see all that stuff at play.
Yeah, and I mean it's interesting too how these things sometimes play out, because I imagine it was pretty frustrating the length of time that it took for you to have this talk in 2017 and think, oh yeah, it's going to be a movie, but then it's obviously taken 5 years to transpire. But to have Knight doing it it's like, well, yeah, you're going to wait 5 years to have one of the best filmmakers and you know, that I guess the marketing that will go behind that. I mean, it's clearly going to be up there, what one would imagine, with the best horror films of 2023. I mean, obviously we haven't seen it yet, but we've read the source material. We've seen what Night has done before. We've seen, you know, the casting, and as you say, Edgar's director of photography is involved. God, hopefully I'm not going to eat my words, but it would take something to fuck this one up. So really, it must be just so gratifying and like, oh, okay, this is why I had to wait so long, but all worth it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's like, you know, there were these like moments of excitement, you know, and then they pass, like everything does pass. And it's like, you know, and then you sort of like, you remind yourself like, oh man, yeah, this is it happening. So, I mean, I'm back to it feeling like not real, even though, you know, when I was there for 2 days, that was like the most surrealistic, in a political way, in the use of surrealism. Let's say irreal, you know, just being there. So on the set initially, it was just like, oh my gosh, this is nuts. Like, you know, seeing, you know, Jonathan Groff and, you know, and everybody that was there. And then it's like, yeah, you fly back, go back to school, finish out the school year. I was like, wait, did that really happen? I think it did.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sure there will be a lot of those moments to come. You know, when the trailer first hits, and I even allowed myself to say, like, after seeing Nope in the theater, and my daughter's like, oh man, when are they going to start showing? When are they going to start showing the trailers of Cabin before movies? Like, I'm going to have to go see probably some movie I have no interest in seeing just to see the trailer. Yeah.
Yeah. Just stand up in the middle of the cinema like a madman. I wrote that. Right. I fucking wrote it. Sit down and shut the fuck up. Leave. You're blocking the screen. Right. What was that, Bob?
I said, they play the trailer. You stand up. I wrote that shit. Right there, and then you leave.
I like that idea. Like should demand free popcorn or something too on the way out.
Yeah. Well, of course, the latest release from you is the Pallbearers Club, and there's so much to say about this one. I'm not even sure exactly where to start, but why not start at the beginning? With that opening sentence, I am not Aunt Barbara, which is a great and interesting way to begin what is surely your most autobiographical book to date.
Yeah, thank you. I sort of, I knew that had to, well, at a certain point, I knew that had to be the opening line. Yeah, good old Aunt Barbara. How am I going to describe this? Well, I would say in general, and I'll let you ask the questions, but yeah, it's definitely by far, a lot of my stuff is autobiographical, or I mean, it's probably more accurate to say that a lot of stuff from your own life, I mean, and you too, I'm sure, experience the same thing as writers. A lot of your own experience gets filtered into works, some in ways big and small. But, you know, for this book, I definitely rolled around in it quite a bit, you know, purposely so, you know, because I felt like it fit what I wanted the story to be.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, in terms of what the story is, and this is the crazy thing, that this is even a difficult book to give an elevator pitch or to give a synopsis or a one-liner. It's like, well, there really isn't a one-liner, but I mean, it's found memoir. There's vampire mythos linked in. It's also autobiographical. It's kind of about, well, not even kind of, it is about our mortality. It's about growing old. I think maybe, and also, I mean, that's even before we've got to the rather experimental format in which it is told. But I think because of the kind of vampire element, for those unfamiliar, why don't you tell us a little bit about the legend of Mercy Brown?
Sure. Yeah. And this is, for anyone who hasn't read the book, it's not a huge spoiler. It gets talked about on page like 60 or something like that. And well, anyway, so Mercy Brown is a part of this like weird pocket of New England folklore that I'm finding a lot of people know about, but I didn't. And I was like, when I discovered it, and I didn't discover it until I had the title for the book, and I was looking for some sort of supernatural way into, or aspect of the story that I hadn't discovered yet. I was like, man, I've lived here my whole life. How did I not know about Mercy Brown? So anyway, Mercy Brown is the last known New England vampire. She died from tuberculosis in 1892. Her mother had died 10 years prior. Her sister had died, I forget how many years prior. Her older brother was sick. And when Mercy died, before her brother, the townspeople, and they lived in Exeter, Rhode Island, which, I mean, Rhode Island's not a very large state, but it's still rural now. It was, super rural then. But anyway, people in the late 1890s or late 1800s didn't know what tuberculosis was. They called it consumption. And no one knew how it started, what it was, and especially in the rural communities, people assumed it was almost like a supernatural element to the passing of consumption from family member to family member, because tuberculosis would just run right through a family. Anyway, the locals managed to convince her Mercy's father that we need to test her to see if she's coming back at night and continuing to feed or make her brother sick. So the test, and they never used the word vampire. Vampire wasn't sort of attributed to Mercy Brown until later. But the test to see if Mercy was returning from the dead at night to feed on her brother, they exhumed her body. You open the chest and look at the heart. If the heart is full of blood, that's a sign that she's a vampire. I'll use vampire, even though they didn't. Of course, she was somewhat freshly dead, so that's what decomposition does: is fills your heart fills with that settled blood. And the cure was so if the heart's full of blood, you take it out, burn it, you take the ashes, put it into water. The brother drank the heart ash water, and that was supposed to cure him, which it did not. But her father never got tuberculosis. The other sort of interesting aspect of it, when I said that Mercy Brown was like the last of these New England vampires, those types of exhumations that I just described, where tuberculosis was running through families and people would exhume the deceased to check their heart. It happened. I hope I have the number right, but I think it's 40 times by last count. There's a wonderful book on this folklore called Food for the Dead by his last name is Bell. I don't have the book in front of me. So yeah, Mercy Brown. It was wild to me that I could look up articles on this exhumation in the Providence Journal, still the biggest newspaper in Providence, Rhode Island. And obviously, as they described what had happened, they described, the rural townsfolk and super negative terms, as they probably should have been, as being superstitious and this is ridiculous, this is barbarism, etc. But it doesn't seem so long ago, 1892. So anyway, Art's best friend who joins the Pallbearers Club, or he doesn't become his friend until she joins the Pallbearers Club. Art, in his memoir, after in the beginning he says, "I'm not Aunt Barbara," he tells the reader very early on in that first chapter that he's changed all the names within the memoir. But within his memoir, he names his friend Mercy Brown.
Yeah.
Either purposefully or not purposefully. I guess you have to read to find out.
Yeah. And not really a question, but Alan Baxter wrote on Patreon, "Mercy lives in my head now, Paul, but I'll never meet her. How dare you?" So
poor Alan, I'm sorry. Yeah. Well, a lot of Mercy is the voice in my head.
Yeah.
So I I'm sorry, Alan. Sorry to have spread that headworm.
Yeah, yeah. And in terms of that book, Food for the Dead, so it's by Michael Edward Bell.
Thank you. Yes.
I mean, the clue would have been if you'd have looked at, what's the name of this person I'm talking to? Oh, Michael.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the same name.
Yeah. I remembered Bell. I couldn't remember the first name.
Yeah.
But it was fine when I did research, like, of course there's stuff online, but almost everything I found online, including links in the Smithsonian online archives, all sort of reference Michael Bell's work. So I was like, I should probably just read his book.
Yeah. Well,
it's very reminiscent of the 16th, 17th century, Romanian European. It's like if you read those vampire cases over and over and over, they exhumed the body, and it was not in a state of decomposition.
Right.
And then this has happened when, like 1900s, right, or like late 1800s.
Yeah, late 1800s. Yeah.
And it's like the superstitions. Man, they don't die. That's what the vampire is the superstition. It's crazy.
Yeah, right. And I can't remember, because I know Michael Bell in his book talks about some of the European superstitions, because they don't quite match one to one, but some of them, like I think one of the European ones is, their hair was growing longer, which obviously we know happens.
Right.
And some of them were like, finding like vines inside the coffin, growing things, if I'm allowed to say. Yeah. So, I mean, it seemed like there's some, for sure, like some overlap, but the fun part also, Michael Bell argues that there isn't, or he can't find like a sort of a direct line or lineage to either, European folklore or indigenous folklore. He sort of argues there's this weird little New England thing, that happened. It happened over and over again in the 1700s and 1800s.
Wow. Okay. So that kind of ruins that theory, but that's good to know. I'm definitely, and I've never heard of this book until now, so I'm definitely about to check it out, because I'm working on something with vampires, and this sounds like some things to pull from. There you go.
Nice.
Well, of course, in your work, you always take a very wide definition of different tropes, and you really extend those things beyond what might have been their previously perceived limits. I mean, zombies in Survivor Song, and possession in A Head Full of Ghosts being two of the most obvious examples. Now you're back at it again with the vampire, but I wonder, I mean, what is a vampire to you, or how would you go about defining a vampire?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not sure. I mean, because the fun part is there are like so many sort of types of vampires, and the vampire as a sort of a general concept of sort of like without defining it, I suppose, as a zombie, where it's like a living dead feeding off the living. Like, it's not a zombie going after brains. It's some sort of creature feeding on blood or feeding on energy, or all the different sort of iterations within so many different cultures throughout the world. It's interesting that almost every culture has some form of vampire. So in some ways, for me, like, the vampire has always been a little bit overwhelming to think about writing a story using a vampire. And my friend and yours, John Langan, for years has been like, "When are you going to write a vampire novel?" Like, leave me alone, John.
Yeah.
And then he would show off by writing vampire stories, great vampire stories.
Yeah.
He has one in his new collection, Corpse Mouth. I'm forgetting the title of it. I'm sorry, John. I'm so bad with titles. But it opens with essentially what's his yard. And there's like this big, if you go in John's real life house, like if you go far enough through the backyard, it goes on to sort of like wooded state area. And then there's like this little creek, and this vampire story opens with, hey, there's like a big tower thing, or it looks like a tower down at the creek. It's like, maybe it's the kid building, like, one of the neighborhood kids building something down there. And ends up being this insane, and I mean that in the best of all, best descriptive terms, insane vampire story. And the bastard even in and I say that lovingly, John. In Ellen Datlow's Final Cuts anthology, his novella Altered Me, Altered You, Altered Beast, Altered You. Again, I butcher titles. It's again a wonderful vampire novella in which I'm the vampire. Me,
Yeah.
which he renamed. He named me Gaetan Cornichon because he's very funny. Cornichon being a little pickle, right? Obviously, or maybe not so obviously. I don't know. So anyway, John's like, and obviously the Wide Carnivorous Sky from an earlier collection. John's always done like amazing vampire stories, and I don't know. For me, they've always been like, I don't know, weird kind of block because the other books that, especially in the novel form, because I tend to try to take a trope and one of the questions I usually ask myself is how could this really happen? How. Not to say that there isn't invention and supposition and in the supernatural, but like I want to try to root it in reality as much as I can. And I don't do that every time, but typically that's what I've done with my novels. Less so in the short stories. Yeah. So anyway, like when the story for when I finally sort of had enough to start writing the Pallbearers Club and had Mercy Brown's story, I thought I could have, because of how I was going to approach the story, I thought I could have the best of both worlds where, I am playing it ambiguous as to whether or not something is vampiric or supernatural is happening. But also at the same time, because of the nature of the story, I could get like really weird with it. And that was a lot of fun to do, as opposed to something like Survivor Song, where it's zombie adjacent, but I really tried to make the science of it work. And then A Head Full of Ghosts, like, if things were happening that supernatural, like I didn't go over the top weird, so much so that the only explanation for the weirdness was that it had to be supernatural. That I didn't think that would have worked in A Head Full of Ghosts. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, big long rambly answer.
No, not at all. And I mean, I've said many a time before that particularly in your novels, I mean, one of their strengths is the ambiguity, the fact that it can be read as both supernatural or grounded solely in reality. I like that because, I mean, I just think having it unexplainable makes it more interesting and makes it scarier. I mean, we've said countless times before that when you can explain or when you see the monster, it removes some of that fear. So the fact that you don't know, wait, is this real? Is it supernatural? It only adds to it.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I share a similar point of view on that. That's not to say you can't have, I certainly enjoy explicitly supernatural events within works too. It's just all, I don't know, it all comes down to me is like what's going to serve the story the best. And so far more times than not with my novels I've hit upon involving ambiguity in some way. Maybe part of it is, especially in a horror story or horror novel, like even if I'm trying to think of even if there aren't deaths within the story, like the threat of death is usually there in some way, right? I don't know. I feel like anytime I invoke sort of an ambiguous element, I feel like anytime you're invoking ambiguity, either consciously or subconsciously, like the reader is going to correlate that in some way to sort of the ultimate ambiguous question that awaits us at the end of our life, right? Like we don't know what's going to happen when we die. And I think almost all horror stories sort of play with that fear in one form or another. At its core. I mean, obviously not every story, but so many do. So I don't know, like, it's, to me, I mean, it's interesting, the idea that we just don't know. And like, I like exploring that and exploring the ways that we either cope with it or explore the ways that we convince ourselves one way or the other, what's the truth, what's really happening.
Yeah. Well, I know that a student in your school actually set up a Pallbearers Club, which was the impetus for this particular strand of the book. And I was wondering, Did you talk to that student before writing the book, or have you spoken to them after? It's like, by the way.
I've talked to his younger brother.
Is that his agent?
No. He graduated like the spring of 2020, but that meant it was like all online for like 3 months of it. So, and he also so this particular student didn't invent the Pallbearers Club out of whole cloth himself. Like, I feel like I vaguely remember, looking online that there were other such clubs, elsewhere in the country, or other sort of similar. You're volunteering to serve at a funeral home in the manner that's described in the book. Serving elderly and or homeless who don't have a lot of living relatives. Which is a long way of me saying that no, I did not directly. Is that true? I certainly didn't have like a long conversation with him. I think I mentioned to him in passing once. I'm like, hey, I'm going to call my book the Pallbearers Club. He had said that, I think they'd only done it like once or twice or something, or he didn't get that many kids to join up. Yeah. But
so then there's even more parallels.
Right. No, I did have his younger brother. I had to help coach the junior varsity baseball team in the spring. And I say that with all the anguish I can in my voice. And I had his younger brother on the team, and I told him, it's like, oh yeah, this book I have coming out this summer is something that your brother did. Do you remember that? And he's like, no.
So that was that conversation. Yeah. No, I mean, I thought for that student, it's a pretty interesting bit of trivia, but perhaps they do not share my sentiments.
I'll give him I did have him when he was a freshman in my geometry class. I'll see if I can give him a retroactive A.
Yeah, nice idea. But I mean, I think that there were many moments where I knew, okay, this is fairly autobiographical, but perhaps the two biggest pointers were when you mentioned scoliosis, and then you just kept mentioning Husker Du, to the point where every chapter is titled after a Husker Du song. So really, Paul, has this obsession with Husker Du gone too far?
Probably. Yeah, but like, I mean, a big part of the reason why I sort of leaned into the autobiography of it was, so we discussed the idea of, where I got just even the title, the Pallbearers Club, from, and thinking about that student who made the announcement, tried to start the club. I thought to myself, like, oh man, like when I was a senior in high school, there's no way I could have done something like that. And right off the bat, that sort of interested me. I was like, oh, all right, so maybe this, I'm going to set this, the start, at least in the late 80s, where basically an alternate reality me is trying to start this club, because I thought that would be interesting. And also the idea that this story might become a little bit more interior, also a lot more expansive in terms of the timeline compared to my previous two novels, Survivor Song and Cabin. That appealed a lot to me. I felt like those two books sort of almost written like one after another in some ways. I don't know. I felt like tired after those books, insofar as like, they were kind of stressful to write, given that they took a place over such a compressed time period. And they so sort of actively engaged with like the political nows. I don't know. I was looking for something that was going to be different. Like I didn't want to write the same book again. Part of that actually was my, U.S. publisher, like kept shading my stuff more towards like, oh, calling this a thriller, which is, fine. But like, also like, I'm not writing a thriller every time. Like, I'm a horror writer, and I want to write all sorts of different types of horror. So anyway, I figured putting me in a story would fit the bill, and maybe, taking out the horror on a character that was me instead of other people that I usually do was only fair.
Right, and having written, 2 books back to back that could be classified as thriller, And obviously, I guess your publisher being quite keen on that, with thrillers being typically easier to market and seen kind of classically as more commercial. Did you get a lot of pushback, and did it actually make this one quite a difficult sell, given that it's not like it's not a thriller in the traditional sense at all? And I mean, I haven't even got to the part about notes and the margins yet, but just purely in terms of what it was about. I mean, is your publisher trying to push you to be more of a thriller writer, even though that's not what you want to do?
No, I mean, not actively, but so like in December of 2019, as the cloud of the pandemic was approaching, I just turned in Survivor Song, and my editor was very happy. And I was actually in New York City to do a reading at, Ellen Datlow's KGB reading series with Nathan Ballingrud. Before the reading, I had dinner with my editor and agent and Nathan, and it was fun. But she sort of just offhandedly talked about, talked about the previous two books, and I don't know, just like I just got the feeling I knew like the editing or the marketing side of things, and I hadn't told her about the Pallbearers Club, but I tried to warn her there. It's like, hey, the next book's not going to be a thriller. It'll still be hopefully like scary and fun and stuff like that, but I just don't think it's not going to have a thriller structure. And so fast forward like 5 months later, because I was off deal, Survivor Song was the end of my previous book deal, so we had to pitch my editor again. Which is fine. We both love working with each other, and we wanted to continue to do so. So I turned in 30 pages in a summary. So she knew early on what this was going to look like. And it certainly, I don't think if you read the summary, none of it says shouted thriller.
Yeah.
And so no, there was no real pushback on that. No, I mean, not at all. There was never like the phrase like, hey, this isn't a thriller, so we can't do this. I did tighten up the book a little bit, but it had to be tightened up. Not having anything to do with like the marketplace or whether or not this was a thriller or not a thriller. Just for the sake of the story. There was, for as much as there's still like the slow burn, interior monologue, diatribe, speeches at times, there was probably, there was 30 pages that I cut out of this book when I turned in the draft.
And in terms of that format, I mean, I said before, it's a found memoir. It's been found by Mercy, who is then essentially critiquing the story, the memoir, as we go along, and almost kind of fact-checking in a sense and being like, whoa, that's not exactly how that happened. But I'm wondering, I mean, how does one ensure that the form isn't a gimmick, or the form doesn't undermine the story, or perhaps put in a better way, I mean, how do you ensure that the form is not just an extension of the story, but is part of its very essence?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, right? But that's a great way of putting it. Those are the things I had to ask myself and remind myself when I was writing the story, because I knew, fairly early on, like for me, it was a little bit of like a logic experiment to like, oh, hey, this is a found memoir. Okay, who found it? And once I knew the character that found it, it was like, well, I knew that she was going to comment at the end of each chapter, and she probably couldn't resist commenting within the margins itself. So, I mean, Mercy has, I think, multiple roles within the story, aside from, her character being very important. There's basically two unreliable narrators, in this novel. I think, honestly, one of her more important roles was to be there sort of like to cut Art's voice a little bit, because Art is, very purposefully melancholic, maudlin. I think clearly by the time he's an adult, someone who's suffering from anxiety and depression as well, and that's a little bit hard to take. Some of the woe is me stuff that he indulges in. I think if it was just his voice, I do think I would have had to have written him differently. And Mercy was there, not even to lighten things up a little bit, but also like to be there to call Arton his bullshit, to be hopefully like a little bit of a counterbalance, within the narrative, but also I hope that sort of relationship would become both more fraught and more poignant, the deeper you get into the book. So that aspect was super important to me. And again, I tried to warn my editor because I knew it was going to be a pain in the ass to publish, particularly in the physical format. So, I mean, I mentioned it obviously when we first pitched the book. And when I first turned in the book, she's like, do we have to have the margin comments? And I said, yes, they have to be there. And she didn't push back too much on it. And in fact, I mean, they went above and beyond in the physical book. I never asked for red ink. I knew that was a cost that would be way more expensive. So I was really blown away that they said, oh no, like we're going to do the first print hardcover, red ink for Mercy's comments, which was really cool.
Yeah. And just visually really adds another layer, adds more depth to the book.
Yeah. Definitely. I hope so. I mean, I thought I helped in a weird way to get people to, continue to turn those pages to see, because those red comments, and even if they're not red, like in the Titan version, I think the Titan version does an amazing job too of they went the extra effort to really make all the underlines and everything else look like they were actually handwritten. It looks very natural. So, I mean, that certainly draws the eye, and I understand it takes a little bit of acclimation as a reader to get used to that, but hopefully, for most people that it works for them.
See, now you've let slip that the formatting is different in the Titan version. Maybe all those hardcore Tremblay fans, they're like, well, we've got to pick up that one as well, to see the visual difference. So, yeah, do it, reader, and
yeah, do it.
Yeah,
do it.
Thank you so much for listening to This Is Horror podcast with Paul Tremblay. We'll be back again next time for the second and final part of that conversation. But if you want to get that ahead of the crowd, if you want to get every episode ahead of the crowd, then become our patron at patreon.com/thisishorror. Not only do you get early bird access to each and every episode, but you get to submit questions to the interviewee. And coming up soon, we've got Jonathan Jans, and we've got John Niven, an author that I absolutely love. So I'm really thrilled that we're going to be getting John Niven on the podcast for the first time. He has written a number of books, including Kill Your Friends, The Amateurs, and Straight White Male. And if you haven't read John Niven before, I think you should seek him out. Okay, before I wrap up, a little bit of an advert break.
Tried and True or Done to Death. It Was All a Dream, an anthology of bad horror tropes done right, revives even the most exhausted cliches with stories from some of horror's biggest names like Gemma Files, Gabinio Iglesias, and Haley Piper. It Was All a Dream, an anthology of bad horror tropes done right, available anywhere you buy books online. Use this code ThisIsHorror for 20% off through the month of October when you order direct from HungryShadowPress.com. Horror on Main, a new weekend convention for the horror community. Exploring all the shadows of horror, our guests include writers and actors, but also artists, publishers, directors, composers, and more. We've been going to cons for over 20 years and are changing up the little things to make the big picture amazing. Beyond guests, contests, movies, panels, and podcasters, our layout and programming are designed to further incorporate the very idea of community. Join us Memorial Day weekend 2023 in Hunt Valley, Maryland. Come to the block party and meet your new neighbors. HorrorOnMain.com.
Now, before I go, I just wanted to say another thing about the Patreon, and that is that at the moment we are doing NaNoWriMo. So if you're embarking on that, or you're thinking, fuck it, let's just get into it right now, then do consider becoming a patron, because you're going to be surrounded by a load of other people doing NaNoWriMo and supporting you through that. And of course, with Patreon, you can be part of a supportive community all year round. We've always got writing challenges. We're always egging each other on and wanting each other to do better. So it's just a really positive place, and it could be the place to be to take your writing to the next level and to find that writing community that you've been looking for. So do check it out, patreon.com/thisishorror, and see if it's a good fit for you. As always, I would like to end with a quote, and this is from the philosopher Seneca. As each day arises, welcome it as the very best day of all, and make it your own possession. We must seize what flees. I'll see you in the next episode for part 2 with Paul Tremblay. But until then, take care of yourselves, be good to one another, read horror, keep on writing, and have a great, great day.
This is Horror Podcast.